Hello, everyone. As I said, I'm Sarah. I'm going to talk about RESTful APIs and, of course, how to build it with Symfony. Who am I? First of all, I work for Serializer France, and I'm a trainer, a developer, and, of course, I love to share. Who use Symfony? Wow, nice. Who knows REST? Okay, why are you here? So I'm just going to do a little round with REST. So REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It's not a standard, it's an architecture, as you may know. It's most of the time associated to a service-oriented architecture, well known as SOA, and it's about managing your resources. There is 6 constraints of REST. The first one is client-server. It's about having a separation of concerns and a portability. You have a client that's consuming an API, and you have your server that serves everything that you need with your API. It's stateless because it relies on HTTP. And you may know that it's better to handle the session on the client side because you need to be stateless on the server. Cache, of course. You have to think about that when you are building your API. It's about avoiding useless requests. Layered system, when you are asking for a resource, you don't care what's going on the other side, on the server side. So you don't know how it works behind, you just ask for a resource. Uniform interface. Each resource has its identifier, you know the URI. Each resource has its representation. Yeah, we are going to see that after. And it's about auto-descripted messages. Let's take an example with JSON. If you are receiving your resource in JSON, you will have something saying that it's in JSON, you know, the content type. And the last part, it's optional. It's code on demand. I never did that, but you know, it's a constraint, so let's talk about that. It's about more than asking for a resource. It's about asking for some code to perform it on the client side. As I said, REST is about relying on HTTP. So you know all these methods. All these methods are, there is 2 more, but I didn't put them, trace and connect. Never use them, so. It's about the RFC 2616. Of course, you all read that. Okay. I'm going to show you how to use all of this stuff. So there is a lot of tools. It's about demystify all of these things and how to use them. So first of all, the Symfony full stack. I'm not going to explain what is Symfony. You know that. You have a request. Usually it looks like that. You have the resource that you want, the HTTP method, the protocol, some headers. With Symfony, it's about using this object. You already know. There is also the response. Usually it looks like that. This time it's about having the protocol, the HTTP code status, some headers, and maybe a response body. And yeah, you are using this object on the HTTP Foundation component. RESTful APIs. You have to keep in mind that all of your REST APIs could be in JSON, XML, HTML, whatever you want, actually. When you are building an API, you have to think about the fact that it's done by developers, to developers. So you have to keep in mind that when you are building an API, you have to make sure that it's easy to use. You know this famous picture? So yeah, there is 4 levels to go through REST. There is the level 0, the swamp of POX. POX stands for plain old XML. And it's about asking for a resource, but using always the same method, and always using the same identifier. When you go one step further, this time you make sure that each resource has its URI, but you're still using the same HTTP method. Most of the time it's post. When you go on level 2, it's about having several resources, having some methods to identify each, what you need to do with your resources. And level 3, it's the very high level. It's not easy to go on this level, but you are going to see that there is a nice tool to go on the level 3. It's about hypermedia. And we know that as HATEOAS. HATEOAS stands for hypermedia as the engine of application state. And it's about I have a problem with this word. It's about discovering the resources that are available with your API. How to build all of that? First, actually it's the second part, but JMS Serializer Bundle. And it's about how to work with your resources. You can go on Packagist and check it out. So, the configuration, it's about most of the time configuration with this bundle. And you can do that in XML, YAML, and annotation. Here I put some annotations because when I build my APIs, I use the annotation, actually. But it's up to you. And it's about serialized properties the way you want. The usage is really easy. Here you can see a controller with an action. And I have an object with 2 properties. And I'm using the service JMS Serializer. Sorry. And call the method serialize my object in JSON, because I love JSON. And yeah, I return my response as usual, without forgetting the content type. And here is the result. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Why don't you use that PHP function JSON and code?
Yeah. It's about using, all the configuration you put on your object. Let's take an example here with the exclusion policy. If you use the JSON encode, you don't go through all your, configuration with JMS. So you have to go through the service. Okay, a best practice here. It's about always exclude all of the properties that you want to serialize. Why am I saying you that? It's basically because here this object doesn't exist in your application, in mine too. But most of the time you have relations. You could have a user with address, an address with a country, and so on. If you don't use the exclusion policy when you are going to call the serialize method on the service, you are going to actually serialize all the graph of your object, and it could be very, very, very long. So yeah, keep in mind that it's using visitor pattern. It's all about object graph, and yeah, when you have relations X too many or things like that, you have to use the exclusion strategy. If you have special needs, I told you right before that it's about just put some annotations or configuration. If the configuration, all of the stuff I showed you before, is not enough for you, you could use the Serializer Handler, and it's about implementing this interface, subscribing handler interface. When you are declaring your service, just don't forget to tag it with the JMS Serializer subscribing handler, and that's it. It will work. So, here is an example. I have my handler. The first method I have to implement is the static function getSubscribing methods. And in this, you have an array of array. And the first thing is the direction. Could be serialization or deserialization. The format you want to use, or actually to have. The type, so the object that you want to serialize. And of course, the method that you will call on one direction, on the other one. So you implement that, and then you just implement those two methods according of what you did here. Here you can see that I put method serialize, method deserialize. Here I have both methods. And yeah, serialization is about getting an object and put it in an array. And on the other side is about getting here data, an array, and return an object. So you can implement the logic that you want, the way you want. So it's really nice. You could use also event subscriber. I told you right before it's about handler. Now it's about hooking on an event. There is 4 events. You have pre-serialize, post-serialize, and the same thing for the deserialization. And it's really easy. You just have to implement the event subscriber interface. Here you can note that it's on the JMS namespace. So you would guess that it's actually using the event dispatcher of JMS, not of Symfony. And yeah, when you declare your service, you just tag it with the name, the type, the direction, the format, the method, and just implement the logic that you want in your listener. Here, on post-serialize, it's about, I put an example of adding data in your JSON. You could, of course, change the way your JSON is returned. Here, it's about just adding one more element in your JSON called new element in JSON and your information. There is other features. I won't talk about them because I don't have the whole afternoon. So you have serialization group if you want to, serve your resource one way on an identifier, and let's say /users, and you want /users another identifier, you could call a group. So yeah, and you have also the versioning. If you are using versioning in your API, you could expose your resource one way or another according to the version you ask for. Okay, now let's talk about the famous FOSRestBundle, and it's about setting up your Symfony application. Here is the package in packages, so go check it out. Here you can see that there is a lot of dependencies. And it's to begin, it's actually about returning a view or data. At the beginning, I showed you with JMS Serializer, you call the service, you call the serialize method, and you return a response. This time is about returning an array or a view, as you may do that in Symfony. When you don't return a response, you just return the array. When you are doing that, actually, you are using the view here in the Sensio Framework Extra bundle. So it relies on this part, so you have to make sure that you disable it on Sensio Framework Extra to use it in FOSRest. And actually, it's the add view. I'm going to show you that right here. It's really, it's actually kind of the same thing when you do add template with Symfony. Okay, with FOSRest you have a content type negotiation part, and it's about, on one side, when you are requesting a resource, make sure that there is a priority of media types that your application is ready to get. It's about using the header accept. And on the response, it's about putting the content type, and it's the media type of the response. It could be JSON, PNG, HTML, whatever you want. It's all about configuration. So here is the configuration of how to handle the way your application is going to, try to serve or receive. And in here, on your request, let's say you have the accept header with text JSON as the first priority. Then anything else, then text HTML. So when you are requesting that, you are calling a resource, let's say /users, and in here, in your configuration, you say, OK, the priority is JSON, and if I can't serve you JSON, I'm going to fall back on HTML. A cool feature, the request body converter. It's about decoding, request body that you would receive. Let's take an example. I want to post new users. I don't want to, handle JSON, then an array. I want to just manipulate objects. And I just use here the annotation @param converter on your action. You put the name of the object that you want to get, and use the converter for FOSRest request body. And as you can see here, I type in my argument. I will receive a post object according to the JSON, the XML, the whatever you got from the request. Don't forget to enable it on FOSRest with Sensio Framework Extra 2. So easy, body converter, enable true. There is also validation. Of course, it works with the validator component. If you don't have it, it won't work. First of all, you have to enable it in your configuration. And, put the special configuration validation error argument. And it's about putting the name of the object you are going to get with all the errors you got. And here you go. Here, on the put post action, I got a constraint violation list interface, and it's called validation errors because I put that in my configuration. So if you want to change it, of course, you could put blah blah, and on your action, of course, you will have to change it to blah blah right there. Then in your in your action, you handle all the all the things you want to with your constraint violation list. It's easy. The param fetcher. You may know that with Symfony you don't have anything to handle, query parameters. A query parameter is what you can see up there with the sort equals to desk. And in here with the special annotation add query param, you can put actually requirements. So it's the same thing as you would have with the placeholders. And in here, I don't allow actually that the sort is not provided when I request this resource. There is a default to ask if there is nothing. And the description, you will see that it's really important when you will do some documentation around your API. You have also the request param. So this time is about getting the request, so the post, the global $_post. And once again, you can validate it with the requirements. Here, I'm asking for only letters. And if the requirements is not enough for you with a regex, you could ask for your special constraint. So in Symfony, you may know that you can construct your own constraint for your validation. Here, you just put the @ and the namespace to your constraint class. And in here, you can see that I get param fetcher arguments, and it's because in my configuration, I put FOSRest param fetcher listener to true. I have something else with the configuration. Showed you right before that you can put true. Here I put force, and actually I'm getting directly the query param I got from my request. And in here, you can see that I could access directly to page. The error handling, don't forget about that. It's very important. You could bind exceptions to HTTP code status. So let's say your application returns a 404. With this configuration, you are asking FOSRest to return, actually, a resource not found exception. And you could use 404 or the constant. You can also use the wrapper. Very nice, actually. if, let's say, your consumer wants to get always the same, the same JSON, let's say code, message, and I don't know, the date or the that time. With the wrapper, you make sure that, by implementing this, you make sure that you return always the same JSON or the same XML or something like that. Because remember, it's about serializing all the time. And, serializing an exception or another could be quite different. And, your consumer could be, have some troubles because the JSON would be different. So, really nice feature. There is also other features I won't talk about, but if you have any question, just ask me. There is automatic generation of routes. I don't use it, but it exists, and it's more about consistency. But of course, if you don't want to use generation, it's up to you. You have also versioning by URL. When I say by URL, let's say you have, in your URL, v1, v2, v3, or whatever. You could do that with MIME type, and FOSRest helps you to handle that. I don't have any opinion on how to handle your the versioning, so yeah, just know that you can handle it by one way or another. And yeah, of course, take a look at the documentation. Now it's on symfony.com, so go check it out. Okay, let's talk about Bazinga HATEOAS bundle. So yeah, it's about unlocking the third level, actually the fourth, because there is a level there. The level 3 of your Richardson model. I told you that it's not quite easy to unlock it, but you will see that with the Bazinga HATEOAS bundle, it's really easy. On packages, it's on version 0.4.0. It's quite stable, actually. I used it for my APIs, and yeah, it works well, so no worries about that. I told you that HATEOAS stands for Hypermedia as the engine of application states. So it's about linking resources. So let's take an example. You have a big API with many resources, but you have to make sure that, remember, keep in mind that you are building APIs for developers, and it's really nice to have a way to discover the next resources or and so on. So it's about self-discovery. A quick, let's talk about HAL and JSON API. Maybe you heard about them. It's specifications. They are, quite good on the one part or the other. And yeah, HAL stands for Hypertext Application Language, and it's about three main words. Links, it's about relations. So let's say you have a resource and you want to display all the relations of your object. You have the underscore embedded if you want to, serve some related resources. And you have the self. It's basically the URL of the current resource. Go check the specification. It's quite nice. So JSON API is about quite the same thing, but the main difference is the wording. You have the meta. You have more information. Let's take an example with the pagination. You have the word links. It's about relations. And you have linked for resources that are linked. And it's actually the underscore embedded on HAL. There is another difference between them. In HAL, it's about, taking resources and embed them and have several levels of embed. With JSON API, it's about having embed, but quite differently because it's not about having several levels, it's having one level with the meta, links, and linked. Again, there is specification, so go check it out. Remember what I'm talking about, the Bazinga HATEOAS bundle? There is, of course, configuration. So you could use annotation, XML, and YAML. It's up to you. I'm going to show you how to use annotation, actually, because I love annotations. And it relies on expression language, so it works only since Symfony 2.4. And it looks like this. Let's take here an example. I told you that I want to expose the special world self, and self is the current resource. And in here, I just put, the special world self here. I have the href, and href uses the other annotation HATEOAS root, and it's about generating a root. And yeah, I have a root called having a name get notification. I want it absolute. And if I have parameters, I put 2 examples to show you that it's very powerful. Here, my first parameter is ID, so I use the special word exp, and on my current object, I call the method getID, and I also have the user, UUID, and here I could call any service. Here it's the security.context. I call the method getToken, getUser, and getUID as I get my user from my security context. So think about the fact that here you could call any services you want. So keep that in mind. The result looks like this. I have my object. Here I'm exposing only my ID. Here you see the ID 1. And I have the underscore links, self, and my beautiful URL. You could also embed things. Remember, the embed is about exposing more information on your resource. So here I use the relation. I put some word, because on my resource I'm going to have the activity. And yeah, on the embed, so I'm just exposing the activity. So on my object, I call the method getActivity. I exclude this embed, so I'm not going to have it in my JSON or XML or whatever if the activity is null. And yeah, I have also the URL to it if I want to, because remember it's about discover the rest of your API. So you have the URL to your activity, and in here it's /activity. Here is concatenation, object get activity, get ID. And the result looks like this. I have the embed, the activity, and of course all the information I have in my activity, the links, and representation. If you want to, I told you that there is meta, links, linked, and so on. You could have anything you want, actually. And with Bazinga, it's about using a representation. And a representation is basically just an object. So it's just about decorating your resource. And yeah, you may know that in the bundle, there is already some classes to help you with that. Here I put the example with the pagination. And of course, there is many more, so go check it out before constructing your own class and your own object. The result here, when I'm using the paginated representation, I get those information, so the page, the current page, the limits, the pages, total, links, the first page, the last page, the next page. And yeah, remember, it's about discovering the rest of your API. So here you help the consumer of your API to go through all the, all the collection of your objects. I told you that, yeah, you could have any representation you want. It's up to you. It's up to what you want to build. You could have a class with the properties you want, and you just let the serializer do its job. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Guzzle, because, you may have, it's my experience, you could have a big application with with a lot of services. When I say services, I say APIs, and you could have this kind of architecture. You have a client asking for resources on a front end asking for resources on the service one. The service one could ask for resources on the servers 2, 3, 4, and so on. And of course, your client could be directly asking for resources on the services. So to handle that, it's really easy by using Guzzle. Most of the time, I use the MIST Service Development Guzzle Bundle, and it offers you actually some services to build endpoints. And yeah, you just call it, and you could put you could call the request or post or put and so on. So it provides you an HTTP client. You could do request response. It handles HTTPS, of course, and there is an error management. Security. I thought about that, on the plane coming here. When I submitted my talk, I didn't put anything on security, but it's really important because, yeah, you may have services that are only accessible to some users, or you could have authorization or authentication. So everything is done, of course, on Symfony. So there is no such thing in the bundle I showed you. And about authentication, I here put some links on how to do that, actually. And most of the time, it's about doing authentication through the special header authorization. You could put your access token coming from, anywhere you want. Let's say you use Facebook or Google or whatever you want. And it's about using your authenticator. There is a very nice, simple pre-authenticator that you could use. You just have several methods to implement. And you just, parse the header, get the access token. You could, call any external services to validate the access token, or get the user. Actually, you just have then to instantiate the user, and put that in the token and so on. Make it setless. Remember, it's about HTTP, and all the session thing could be have to be actually handled on the client side. The authorization doesn't change. You could use, as usual, the famous access control or the as granted. You could do that in your template. use your voter as usual, or ACL. It doesn't change, actually. I told you in the constraints of REST that you have to keep in mind the cache part to avoid useless requests. There is a nice bundle, go check it out. Yeah, I won't talk about that, but it's about configuring the cache instead of doing this in your in your action, let's say. So go check it out and see if it answers to your problems. One last thing, the documentation. The Nelmio API doc bundle. It's really easy, so it looks like that when it's enabled. And actually, you just put some configuration, let's say annotation, because I like that. And yeah, when you display the special root /API/doc, you have this kind of output. And yeah, it's really nice. There is many tools, as I said. Pick what you need. Use them wisely. Don't try to, integrate all of the things that I showed you. It's most of the time about answering to problems. And remember, APIs are done by developers to developers. So, thank you.
We have plenty of time for some questions. If anyone has any questions, put their hand up and just keep it up. We'll come to you.
Thank you. You mentioned before the exception handler in there in order to capture and respond the HTTP status code. How does that work with versioning of the API? So if you're changing your response from one version to another, and you have just only one wrapper, how do you handle that?
Actually, it doesn't exist. There is nothing for that. But I would say that it could be kind of weird, actually. To my point of view. I would say, one way to expose exceptions in one version and the other one, why not? Yeah. But yeah, there is nothing to do with that here with your wrapper. You just implement the method and you have nothing for that. But you can, of course, open an issue on the repository. Remember, it's open source. So.
No more questions? Okay, can we have a round of applause for Sarah, please? You can talk.
Yeah, okay. I have one more thing, actually. There is no more display. Can I have one more slide about references to have some, things to see, watch, read. Yeah, here, the Symfony REST edition that integrates all of the things that I showed you before. There is, of course, some video. The first one is from Lucas and William, very famous guys. The first one works a lot on FOSRest, the second one on Bazinga HATEOAS bundle. There is another video, very nice, on best practices for developers when building a REST API application. There is no that much of code, but it's about how to design all of your API. And The last link is the JSON LD. LD stands for linked data. It's a specification. Go check it out. It's really interesting. And that's it.